Hello everyone, welcome back to the FPL Phillips YouTube channel and to my players to buy video for Game Week 3. And I've got 2 free transfers this week. There's a lot of significant potential moves I could be making and a big change I'm looking to do in terms of shifting the funds around my side. So make sure to stay tuned for all of that. Leave a thumbs up if you do enjoy the video. If you're new around here, please make sure to subscribe. It's absolutely free to do so. Of course, hit the red button down below. But without further ado, let's get into things. And I think the first thing I wanted to highlight this week was kind of where's the value in FPL at the moment, and is there any value left in premium assets? Because me personally, I own Salah in my team. I'm looking to take him out. I'm getting loads of funds in the bank if I look to remove him for a cheaper midfielder. And do I just hold those funds in the bank, or do I actually put them into someone else? And if so, who? Because we all own Erling Haaland, Harry Kane's left the Prem, De Bruyne's out injured, Heung-min Son is actually not in the great form at the moment, and Maddison looks a better pick. So I think it's getting to the stage where we're all just kind of going to have to bite the bullet and consider having like 3 or 4 million maybe even just left in the bank. Or maybe even go for a slightly different strategy, which I'm going to discuss in just a second. But I wanted to use this graphic to kind of highlight the table, and Mbeumo up in second for predicted points over the next 3 game weeks when he started the game at 6.5 million is just ridiculous. He's ranked first for fixture difficulty over the next 8 games in terms of across the first 2 fixtures, which admittedly is a small sample size, which is slightly skewed by his 2 penalties, but his expected FPL points data per 90, 11.07 is absolutely ridiculous. His non-penalty expected goal involvements, which of course don't include the penalties, still very, very healthy indeed at 0.68, and that does put him up there with the predicted points total only 0.2 behind Salah, who's nearly double the price. So it's ridiculous really how much value there is at the moment. Even some of the other midfielders slightly further down the list, so Maddison, Eze, Foden and Diaby, these kind of more budget options, are not far behind the likes of Martinelli, Fernandes and Rashford, who are in that 8 to 9 million bracket. So there's a lot of good, cheaper options with better fixtures, really. Liverpool are 10th for fixture difficulty. Manchester United are 11th. When you consider someone like a Diaby or a Foden or a Maddison over the next few games, I think that's where we're going to be kind of making the shift over. But the problem is, if you end up with a midfield 5 of some cheap players there, and you've got a front 2 of, maybe Haaland and Watkins or Haaland and Jackson, we'll discuss forwards in just a moment, then where do you spend the rest of your funds? Because you're going to have a lot left in the bank. But I think the first thing we need to decide is which midfielder do you actually want in the first place? And there's 2 that I'm looking more seriously at bringing in this week. And that's because we see quite significant fixture swings for Spurs in Game Week 3. Manchester City's fixtures are also looking really nice as well. Both these assets are 2 that I'm looking to wait on until nearer the deadline for certain specific but different reasons. But they are 2 of my main transfer targets this week as my replacement. Most likely for Mo Salah, but maybe even for Marcus Rashford if I decide not to give him that 1 more week. In terms of which one I'll go for, I'll looking like Phil Foden is probably my favourite option at the moment. His expected minutes per game are lower, but in terms of performance on the pitch, his per 90 stats over the first 2 have looked fantastic, and just from the eye test, he's looked absolutely brilliant. He's a joy to own in FPL at the moment right now, I imagine, for anyone owning him. Maybe a little bit frustrating that you didn't get more out of him in the last game if you do already own Phil Foden. But 7.34 expected FPL points per 90 and the XG of 0.41 per 90, blowing Maddison's out of the water, which is rather significant when you consider him being a midfielder, getting 5 points for a goal and 3 for an assist, as opposed to forwards who only get 4 for a goal and 1 for an assist. The 2-point difference between goals and assists in midfielders is something that I think maybe gets a little bit overlooked in FPL, not highlighted enough. It does get talked about, but it is rather significant. So midfielders who have a high XG and a low XA are much better than the midfielders who have a low XG or a high XA. It's kind of the reason why I didn't go for Fernandes, to be honest, at the start of the season. Not that he doesn't have a lot of goal threat, but it's just that kind of demographic and character of player, I suppose. So that's the reason that I'd sway for Foden over James Maddison. The swing may change, of course, if we find out penalty duties maybe are with Maddison or whatever. It could be with Heung-min Son, but for whatever reason, Maddison's goal threat may go up. It's a very small sample size, of course, for this data over the first 2 game weeks. And FPL Review still do have Maddison as a higher expected points total over the next 3 game weeks than Phil Foden. But it's the fixtures over the fixtures afterwards as well that you need to include. When we see Forest and Wolves in Game Week 6 and Game Week 7 for City, comparing that to Spurs who take on Arsenal and perhaps not the hardest fixture in the world at all, Liverpool in game week 7 for them. But I'll also look a little bit further on when we consider the fixture difficulty over the next 8. We see Spurs do have some very nice fixtures after that as well. They're second on the row here. So game week 8, they've got Luton, then Fulham and Crystal Palace in the 2 games following that. Whereas Man City have some tougher fixtures, which kind of drops them when we consider the next 8 game weeks all the way down to that kind of 9th mark. So they've got Arsenal and Man United in game week 8 and game week 10 respectively. So although Spurs have a trickier patch in game week 6 and game week 7, Man City do have tougher fixtures in around the game week 8 or game week 10 mark. But there are other reasons that I'm definitely going to be leaving these moves until at least nearer the deadline. And one of those is that Maddison was seen actually leaving the stadium after the Spurs game on crutches. He told reporters it was as a precaution, but it's still enough to put me off making any sort of early transfer. Not that I'd usually do that, but even if there's a price rise or anything looking likely, I would not go for Maddison until the deadline. And Phil Foden, the main reason I wouldn't go for him early is because Man City are still getting rumoured with bringing in more attacking assets, which could limit his minutes even more. It's already a brave decision to go and dive into Pep Roulette, but if City bring in another attacker, that of course reduces Phil Foden's expected minutes even more if they can play in the kind of positions that Phil Foden's looking to take up in the absence of Kevin De Bruyne. So I'll definitely keep an eye on that. I think the transfer window closes around game week 4, so I might be willing to take the risk on Man City not bringing in anyone else, or Phil Foden still getting starts anyway, which I'm hopeful that he should with the performances that he's been putting in. But those are the kind of midfield options that I really like the look of at the moment, and probably the 2 from this table, because I already own Mbeumo, who I'm looking more likely to bring in place of the kind of more expensive ones, so you can see the exclamation marks next to Salah and Rashford. The ones who are in my team are probably the ones who are looking quite likely to leave right now. And one thing I definitely wanted to discuss was kind of moving those funds. Where do we put them? And do we put them in a strong front 8? And if so, the problem with that is you're going to have a benching headache, right? Well, maybe not so. With this rotation pairing and other rotation systems at the moment, maybe that's the thing we need to look for that we haven't seen in previous seasons become that apparent and be that strong of an option, is rotating players. And the main issue with it is that people find it painful, right? To have points sat on the bench. If you bench someone like a Watkins or like an Eze, who I've used here, and they get points on the bench, it's not the best feeling in the world, right? If you get a benching headache wrong, it's rather annoying and it rather stings, basically, is the problem. But what it could be is actually the best strategy, and maybe that sting might be worth it to actually go for this. As I mentioned, if I'm taking money out of Salah and I'm downgrading to someone like an Eze, I'm going to still have my midfield 5, but I'm going to be able to have the funds to afford to have a front line of something like Haaland, Jackson and Watkins. 3 very nice looking forwards, and so I'm going to have a strong front 8 of one I'm going to need to bench. And in that case, we can look to rotate, whether it's 2 midfielders, whether it's 2 strikers, maybe it's a midfielder and a striker like we've got here. Either way, I've just got to bench one of those midfielders or those forwards every week. And now you can use this with 4 different players and start 3 of them. You can just do a simple 1-2 rotation like this. There's very complex rotation plans, but we should be looking at perhaps a little bit more in depth at those. I've personally used the Fantasy Football Fix rotation planner to actually find these 2 teams, but Aston Villa and Crystal Palace's fixtures up until game week 14 look like they rotate really, really nicely. You can see the fixture set you get: Burnley, Wolves, Crystal Palace, Fulham. Brighton, the toughest game in here, really, in game week 7. That's still a home fixture. Forest at home, West Ham at home, Luton at home. There's a lot of home games in here, and even some of the away ones look like very nice fixtures on paper a bit later on. I don't know how likely it is that you keep 2 players for this many game weeks consecutively in a row, and maybe some other player hits form that you're going to want to take out. So, committing to a plan up until game week 14 is something that doesn't often come off with how quickly football can change. But it still looks very, very nice on paper, and it could end up being a plan that does pay off long term, because I think Watkins looks a great option. I think Eze is definitely going to come good, so I think he's probably the one who'll look like he'll be in my team for a while when I do transfer him in. But yeah, I really like the look of something like this, rotating 2 of my attackers, maybe taking a few points on the bench on the chin, a couple of game weeks of the season, but still ultimately working out as having the most points in my starting 11 each week, which is the main thing. Points on the bench don't matter, they're irrelevant. If players do well on the bench, then take it as they're in good form, basically, is going to be the main trouble with this. I know it stings, I've had points on the bench before in the past, but maybe it's something we should be giving more thought to, having a really strong front 8 with budget spread across it, and just benching one of them every week based purely on fixtures. And I'm seeing a lot of talk about just making the one goalkeeper transfer this week and rolling into game week 4, which does look like a nice strategy, to be honest. I think a lot of people's teams right now look very nice for game week 3. If you own a Bruno or a Rashford, you're very wise to just probably give them one more week. Make one transfer this week, roll your second one if you have 2 saved, hopefully, and then you'll still have 2 again for game week 4, which is probably going to be a game week where you're more likely to want to use 2. So I'm definitely not against this. I usually would say don't make a keeper transfer, but Pickford doesn't look great at the moment. I think it was probably a mistake to go with him if you did at the start of the season. I've got Johnston of Palace, who it looks like Dean Henderson might join. The rumours are definitely circulating with regards to that transfer, so that's not looking too great either at the moment. So I'm looking at Sanchez, people recommending him, and I'm also thinking maybe Flekken at 4.5 could present a really nice option too. And the reason I'm kind of looking at Flekken rather than Sanchez is, although Chelsea's fixtures over the next 5 look really nice, there is a game week in Brentford's fixtures that puts me off them, and it's game week 5. But the fact that most people own Turner at the moment, and he faces Burnley in that game week, means that we could once again rotate Turner in for that fixture and still have a really nice set of games. And we saw with the fixture difficulty rankings before, Brentford very high up. So they're first, even with that Newcastle game included. So when you take that out of the picture, their fixture set looks even stronger. And Chelsea are still pretty high up, but they are down in 6th. So the fixtures do look better for Brentford. The main thing that would put me off going for Flekken is that Brentford look too good at the moment, so maybe I'm going to end up wanting an outfield triple up on the Brentford players to try and capitalise that. So Mbeumo, maybe Visser up front as well, and then potentially a defender such as Pinnock, Henry. We'll get onto those in just a second. But the data over the first 2 game weeks would also suggest that Flekken is the stronger option. Not only expected FPL points per 90, but expected clean sheets per 90. Chelsea just don't seem to be able to find that defensive solidity that we thought maybe we'd see under Poch, and maybe we will see, where with the fixtures improving, maybe they'll be able to find some form defensively with regards to that. They've got Caicedo and Lavia coming in as well, who you'd imagine will improve Chelsea. But the vibes just generally over the last couple of years, no matter how much money they've spent, seem to be that they're not the most solid defensively. And when you consider that Flecken's looking pretty good for bonus points as well, although Sanchez ranks slightly higher over expected points for the next 3, long term, I think Flekken could be the better option, or maybe even, as I mentioned, if we've got all these funds in the bank, going for someone like Emi Martinez at Villa could even be an option. Going for Onana at Manchester United. Spending money to go for an expensive goalkeeper could definitely be something that becomes an option. If we look at the fixtures for some of the other big teams, we've got Edison, who could come in. He's relatively near the top, kind of mid-table for fixture difficulty. Same with Onana. We've got other goalkeepers, but Crystal Palace, who I said I've got Johnston from, very near the bottom. So I think if you've got Pickford or you've got Johnston right now, a goalkeeper transfer is definitely something that you could do. Despite how strong Everton's fixtures look, I just think that they look like prime relegation candidates again. They're going to drop a lot of points early on and probably ship a lot of goals. I think a goalkeeper transfer could actually be something that people don't really consider and don't like to have to do, but might be something that is the most optimal this week, I suppose, to do that and have the second free transfer going into next game week and be able to make more moves in game week 4 and have further flexibility with regards to that. So I really like Flekken. I prefer him to Sanchez. The problem is, in just a moment, which we're going to discuss, the other options at Brentford also look very enticing at the moment. And the Brentford defender that I've picked out might actually surprise you. And whilst I really like the look of Pinnock, who's looked great for not only last season, but the season before that, and continues to have really impressive underlying data this early on, and Henry also looks really good at left back, Hickey is one that I'm going to see in basically no teams, I know for sure, but there's a weird reason why I quite like him, and perhaps a reason that people don't really look at when they take into account which defensive options they want to pick, and something I made an entire video on at the start of the season, and that is which defenders get substituted and at which minutes do they get substituted. Because although we've seen clean sheets from Brentford this season, they may get wiped out in around the 80th, 90th minute, something like that. And in that case, you want someone who maybe has gone off and been substituted before that goal has gone in against Brentford. So Hickey is your man for that. He was substituted the most out of any defender like in the Premier League and at Brentford last season. And he's always kind of substituted after that clean sheet will be locked in at the 60-minute mark. Brentford were also one of the teams who had the ball out of play a lot last season, so we're going to see the most added time added on to games at Brentford. You know, you would assume over the average of the season, because their ball is out of play in a lot of their games, unless they change their play style and stuff like that, we're going to see more added time, so more potential for the clean sheet to get wiped out in the 90th plus whatever minutes it ends up being. So Hickey looks quite nice for that reason. I still think I marginally prefer Pinnock and Henry just due to their slightly better underlying data, but Hickey has looked pretty decent anyway, and it's definitely one that I just wanted to bring into the limelight a little bit and suggest maybe could be an option. So there are 3 very nice defensive assets, which kind of backs up why, if I want Vissa and I want Mbeumo and I want one of them, maybe I can't go for Flekken in goal, just due to the fact that it would block a different triple up that I'm going to want from Brentford. So there are other defender options I could go for instead. If you don't go for Emi Martinez in goal, then Matty Cash looks a very nice option, who you can see here. 4.92 expected FPL points per 90 is second, only behind pretty much all the other Brentford defenders. Hickey here, for example, was on 5.37. But the reason that Cash's appeal has gone up for me and for a lot of people was that last game week, Mings got injured. He looks like he'll be out for a decent while now. And that means that the risk of Konsa going and playing right back has definitely dropped quite a lot, because Konsa's going to be needed in that centre-back role. He's not going to be able to play out at right back, and Cash's minutes are now going to be far more assured than they were before. So Emery playing Cash at right back a lot. He's actually had a lot of chances. He missed that really high XG chance in game week 1. He's looked pretty decent, and definitely one I'm considering going for at 4.5. The other 4.5 in here is Udogie at Spurs, whose fixtures take a really nice turn this game week, and I think a lot of people are probably going to look to bring in as a 4.5 option this week. The Spurs fixtures long term look pretty decent, as well as we saw with Maddison, and 4.31 expected FPL points per 90 when, to be honest, we've not seen him have loads and loads of standout chances. He has had one pretty good one. He's a very nice attacking set of data, and his heat maps are looking great as well. And then finally, we've got Gusto at 4.0, who did, as predicted, start against West Ham for Chelsea. Didn't get anything of note in that game, of course, because Chelsea didn't come away with a clean sheet and overall defended quite poor in that one. But if you don't go for Sanchez, then Gusto could definitely be a really nice option. And I suppose the other thing with Sanchez and the caveat is if you have Chilwell, you have Jackson, and then you want to go for Gusto at 4.0 if the James injury is looking serious and Gusto is going to be, a starting right wing back long term for Chelsea, which is going to be hard to avoid, then do you want to go Sanchez in goal and block that Chelsea triple up? Just the same issue that we had with going for Flekken and blocking the Brentford outfield triple up. So I suppose that's the thing to consider there as well. There is a chance that the formation changes and Disasi or Chalobah goes out and plays right back and Gusto gets dropped, which you don't really have with the Brentford defenders too. So that kind of leans itself to going with Sanchez, I suppose, and not taking the risk on someone who might get dropped. But I see Gusto playing quite a lot. I think he's a quality player. I think I'm hoping that Poch is going to see that and continue to start him, because 4.0 million for a Chelsea defender looks like it might become too good to avoid if James is out for a decent length of time. And finally then, we need to touch on those forwards. We already kind of discussed how Vissa could be a really nice option, and his data over the first two is backing that up. An expected FPL points per 90 of 9.35. Of course, again, the disclaimer of small sample size, but when I looked at the data at the start of the season for Vissa and Mbeumo and how they performed without Tony on the pitch last season, I wasn't massively confident that they'd come through and deliver on it, but my God, they have, and Brentford look fantastic at the moment. And overall, my piece of advice with Vissa, although he doesn't have penalties, and although a lot of people own Mbeumo, don't let Mbeumo put you off. And don't let the fact that you're looking to transfer him in put you off going for Vissa, because it feels a bit weird, right? Going up and doubling up on an attack in 1 week is not something that a lot of people do. If people already own Mbeumo and they're looking at transferring in a striker, it's easy to have this kind of weird bias to, I'll go Watkins to cover Villa, I'll go Jackson because I want a Chelsea attacker. consider them in isolation. Ignore the other players you have, just as you have Diaby in your midfield with Watkins. Try to kind of consider these players as standalone assets, because that's what they are at the end of the day. You just want the 11 players in your team who score the most points. It doesn't matter which teams they play for, unless it's with regards to blocking triple ups and stuff like that, and who you can own and affecting other players in your side. So Visser, despite the fact he's not on penalties, there's another player also in there not on penalties now, and that is Ollie Watkins, who seems to have lost the spot kick duties at Villa. Which, to be honest, and debate on Twitter has been, maybe that's a good thing for him, because he's had a pretty terrible record at them. He won the penalty that was, in the game that we had in Game Week 2 for Villa, so there's potential for him to still do that, and the penalties to actually be converted now, and so he can get assists that way. But yeah, Watkins, I don't think the penalty duty does affect him too much, like you say, but overall, we have to say the decrease of an asset, the potential and threat of an asset does go down when they don't have the penalty kicks. I think even with Watkins' record, you would still probably rather have him on pens marginally, but it's definitely something that you've never seen debated before, but it's definitely starting to be debated now with how bad Watkins has been at penalties, basically. Alvarez is another one in here at City, and kind of same scenario with Foden, where the expected minutes and the minutes risk was a factor and could still be a factor until the transfer window does slam close. He takes his chances fantastically well, doesn't he? He takes shots from anywhere and looks like he's going to score, to be honest. And Alvarez, although he's slightly playing out of position, listed as a forward in game, but kind of playing a little bit further back, I think he looks like a brilliant asset, and it's definitely one that we'll be looking to own at 6.5, I'm sure, at some point this season, especially maybe if Haaland picks up a knock or something like that. But I think there are better options at the moment in here, and as mentioned, if City do sign someone, then his minutes risk definitely increases again. If De Bruyne comes back quicker than expected as well, again, that could happen. Whereas someone like a Jackson at Chelsea, with really nice fixtures at the moment, nailed on as the forward and getting loads of chances, is probably just about my favourite option in here. Even in the games where he's been missing these chances, or he's not had as many rated for them, his expected FPL points per 90 is second in here behind Visser. Again, a small sample size, but Chelsea have had two pretty difficult games over the first two, against Liverpool and West Ham away on paper. They're not the easiest fixtures at all, but the man has still been getting chances, and overall, he's just definitely passed my eye test, and statistically in other leagues, he has actually overperformed his XG, which is something that it's fair to say we don't see that often from Chelsea strikers. They tend to underperform their XG massively, so I'm hoping in terms of FPL, if I go for him, he can start putting those chances away. As mentioned, they've got some really nice fixtures. Luton up in Game Week 3 is going to be the time for a lot of people to look to try and jump on him. The Chelsea triple up would be the only other thing to consider, but to be honest, he'd be my second priority at Chelsea behind Ben Chilwell, who's basically playing as a left winger himself, and so doesn't even warrant a discussion in this video. If you don't own Chilwell, then definitely get him in for Game Week 3. I've even seen idiots looking at captaining Chilwell in Game Week 3, which of course don't do. Captain Erling Haaland, of course, only joking. I saw it was Raptor who tweeted that. But yeah, anyway, thank you for watching, everyone. That's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you have enjoyed it. Make sure to leave a thumbs up down below, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Let me know any kind of content you want to see this week, and considering maybe even making a wildcard video. If you'd like to see that, then definitely leave a comment down below and do say it, or like someone else's comment if they've got there first. But other than that, I will catch you all in the next one. Goodbye, everyone.